Today we're going to create a blank in order to draw the observational portrait. You want to draw this on an 18 by 24 piece of paper. You should be using your charcoal media, so your charcoal pencils, charcoal sticks, whether it be your vine charcoal or your compressed charcoal. Try using all of your erasers, your kneaded eraser, your hard eraser, and blending stumps can be fun too. It's really your choice whether you want to lay a charcoal ground down first. Remember, that's taking your vine charcoal and placing it onto the paper and then rubbing it in, maybe placing it onto the paper in a different direction, rubbing it in so that you have a nice neutral middle tone to work on top of. That's a method I really like to do, but if you found that you got enough of it working on your feature studies, it is really up to you. So the very first step that I want you to take in working on these portraits, and this may for some of us feel like, hey, I already know some of this, or I've done some portrait drawing already. Maybe it feels repetitive, but I promise that this is an incredibly helpful exercise. And these are really exercises. What we're doing is just getting comfortable with the idea that maybe some of our preconceptions about where features fall on the face may not be totally correct. So this is just kind of like if you're an athlete, you've got to run the drills, right? So here's the first step for creating your blank. You can see on this piece of paper on the left that I laid down a light ground. And what you want to do first, step one, is draw a rectangle that is 2 units wide by 3 units tall. And I want you, because you're working on your 18 by 24 paper, to have this be relatively large. So if you wanted to make your unit equal 3 inches, your rectangle would be 6 inches wide by 9 inches tall. And I'm going to use my arrow here to just indicate what I'm talking about, right? Let's say this is 3 and 3, that's 6 inches. 3 and 3 and 3, that's 9 inches. So 6 inches wide by 9 inches tall. If you wanted to go bigger than that, make it 4 inches or 5 inches, you're welcome to do that, but don't go much smaller than 3 inches. The next step after you've done that is to draw an oval. And again, I'm using my arrow to just go around that shape. It can be a little bit more eggy shaped if you want, so have that more narrow part towards the bottom, because usually our chins are a little bit more narrow than the top of our head. And you want that egg or oval shape to really fit inside the rectangle snugly, right? So you can see that this oval is hitting the edges of the vertical and horizontal lines. The next step, step 3, is to draw a line through the horizontal center, right? So right here is around the 4.5 inch mark, right? It's a little bit, right here is the 4.5 inch mark on my drawing. So if I were to drop down 4.5 inches, and if I were to go up, it would be 4.5 inches, again, totaling 9 inches on that vertical height. And this is where your eyes are going to be placed. Of course, when you look at the blank at this state, it looks kind of like an alien. It doesn't seem quite right, but I promise you it starts to add up as you start to do the next step. At this eye level line, you're up to step number 4. Divide up that space, this horizontal space between the left and the right, into 5 equal parts. And you can guesstimate this a little bit if you want to. I usually start with one oval and just try to make sure that I'm kind of keeping, generally speaking, the same oval widths across. Don't leave too much space on the left and right side. This is where most people start to get tripped up. They make 2 tiny little circles right in the middle here and then leave 3 inches on either side of each eye. Really trust the process. Leave just one eye on this side and one eye on this side. Again, this will not necessarily be the exact proportions of your subject, but this is what we are starting with. From there, you can make a light indication of where the nose and mouth may fall. So once you've done the eyes, you will probably drop down to get the base of the nose. And the nose is usually about 1/3 of a way to halfway down the face from the eyes. So if you were to Notice that the eyes are right here at the 4.5 inch mark, and the chin's down here about a third of the way down. Right here, oops, is the tip of the nose. And your nose could be longer than that, your nose could be shorter than that. That's just a little gentle guideline for us. And then the mouth is about a third of the way down from that tip of the nose. So if I've got the tip of the nose over here, the mouth from the tip of the nose to the chin, a third of the way down is right over here. You can indicate these very lightly because this will all, again, really shift depending on who your subject is. So you may find that your subject's eyes are much closer together or much further apart. You may find that their nose is really long. You may find that their nose is short. You may find that their lips are quite high on their face. It really depends. This is meant to be just a general armature to ask us to compare against. So first step before you do any of your drawing is to do this. When we do it in class together, I'll always have us all do this all together first before I even go into the demo. So if you wanted to, you could even stop right now, prepare your paper, draw this, make sure you've got this down pat, and then go on to the next step. It's up to you. A couple of points that I always like to just repeat over and over before you start on your portraiture. Remember that your subject's face or your face, it sits on top of this armature called the skull, right? And the skull is a very real thing, kind of strange to think about, but it's definitely there, right? So one of the things that I really try to think about when I'm drawing is this idea that all of these features that I'm drawing, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, they're sitting on this structure. So remember that your eyes are sitting in the sockets, that in fact your nose is made up of cartilage, that your lips are there to protect your mouth, that the ears are attached in order to help us protect our ear canals. All of this is very much important when we think about our facial structure. Even our eyebrows sitting atop those sockets in order to protect the eyes. This drawing on the left here shows exactly some of those proportions we just talked about. So if you look closely, of course, there's no rectangle around this head, but the eyes are, in fact, at the halfway point up from the very top of the face, down to this midway point of the eyes, and then down to the chin. And then if you look again at the eyes and you drop down to the nose, it's about at the 1/3 mark from the eyes down to the chin. And then again, if you look at that tip of the nose down to the chin, again, once again, 1/3. So kind of a very standardized set of proportions on this figure, but again, not necessarily what you'll see on your figure. So let's go through the steps. I have a very loose set of images here that came from an earlier version of this assignment, so it won't exactly match up with what we just started with, but imagine that the rectangle is around this egg-like oval shape. You can see that again, it's about 2 by 1, 2, 3 high, right? So remember that the eyes will fall approximately halfway down the face. You should have that already on your blank. You want to generally place the eyes, and remember that there should be room for around 5 eyes across the width of the face. Again, all of this is drawing a portrait very much straight on. So make sure that whoever you're drawing is just looking straight at you. So you can see that here. This is again about 5 eyes across here. Pay attention to the axis line of the eyes. Are the eyes angled up or down, straight across? Give yourself a light gestural mark indicating so. So we've already done this in terms of our feature studies, so you'll know what I'm talking about here. This idea that your tear duct is at one height and that the edge of your eye may be at another height. This is what you want to pay close attention to. And while you're drawing your eyes, you're probably paying a close attention to that bridge of your nose as well, right? Trying to get that distance between the two tear ducts and making sure that you've got the right distance between there. Think about the eyes in relationship to the skull. Again, they are spheres sitting inside of those sockets. Finding a good sense of those spheres will allow you to drape the eyelids over a shape convincingly. So remember, we've all got our top lids and our bottom lids and the lids above those. We want to be paying really close attention to how those lids are falling across that sphere. Place the nose by checking its length against the horizontal axis of the eyes, right? So now we are starting to combine all of those feature studies that we did individually. So not only are we trying to draw a good nose, a good looking nose, we're trying to draw a nose that is the right length and width to match the face that we've created, right? So you can do some sighting here if you want. You can check to see the width across your eyes, check that to the height of your nose, and see if you're drawing that nose too long or too short. When drawing the nose itself, you want to focus on the nostrils and the outer shape of the nose and really try to avoid any hard lines around the length of the nose. Again, we discussed that as we did our feature studies. You want to place the inner middle lip line. So that inner middle lip line, remember we started with that when drawing mouths, by measuring its placement against the nose. So if you feel good about the length of your nose, check to see how much space is there between the tip of the nose and that middle lip line. And then also how much space is there to the middle lip line down to the chin. Remember, you've started with a loose oval, but you may find that the face that you're looking at is much wider than that initial oval, or much longer. Each of us have incredibly different faces and different proportions, and we only start with that blank in order to give us something to work against. Apologies for the color shifts in here. I know that there's some color correction that could benefit. You want to solidify the length of the chin against the facial features that you've placed. So again, you may not necessarily have to keep it all the way down here. If again, your subject has a shorter chin or a longer chin, you want to be noticing the individual in front of you. You can now begin to tweak your self-portrait, right? Because you've done your eyes, you've checked them in relationship to each other and the space between them. You've dropped your nose, you've dropped your mouth. You have a little bit of the height of the face in terms of where the chin falls. And you can start to check the measurements of features against one another a little more, and the exterior shape of the face, right? This is just features floating in space here. So what you want to start to do is measure out from the edges of the nose to the edges of the jaw, the edges of the mouth, again to that exterior part of the face, the jaw and the chin, and you can start to solidify the outline of the face. From there, you can actually drop a neckline. So your neckline doesn't play a role in that initial blank that we drew, right? The initial blank is just a rectangle, but once you have your jawline and your chin, what I really recommend doing is checking to see where does that vertical line from the neck hit on the chin. Is it narrow? Is it wide? Really make sure to check this against your jawline. It may be wider or narrower than you think. You can also draw in your shoulders, which will likely not be perfectly symmetrical. So something that makes a drawing sometimes look a little bit made up is when everything is just perfectly symmetrical. Something that makes drawings feel very real and observed is noticing those nuances of difference from the left to the right side. So a lot of times our trapezius muscles, which help define this part of our upper back that holds our neck up, they're more developed on one side than another. So if you look closely at yourself or your subject in a mirror, you will notice that those are not perfectly symmetrical. Again, that can add a little bit more of authenticity to your drawing. At this point, you've got a lot going, right? So you can start to add in more detail. You might want to add in irises and pupils, if you haven't done the upper and lower lips already, more dimension to the nose, etc., right? Like this is just your baseline, and now you want to circle around and note where more detail is needed. What you've spent time thus far doing is trying to make sure, again, that your features are sitting proportionally in space accurately. There's some irises and pupils, some dimension to the nose, continuing to move along, starting to add a little bit more value, more details across the face, and now a general sense of the hair shape. Again, with hair, you don't want to draw every single little strand. You want to think of it really just as an overall shape. And again, remember, it is sitting on top of a skull, right? It is sitting on top of something. So really try to get that feeling that this is something that is being held up by the surface below. Just a little bit more detail, continuing to add. And you can start to add value once everything has been placed across the whole face. Or if you started with a value ground, which again, I really recommend, I just happen to have this set of drawings already ready to go. So I decided not to do another value version of it. But I do recommend it. You can keep removing value to add to the form. So keep adding value. You can see why removing value can be easier than adding it. Kind of a mess of charcoal pencil marks on there. But one kind of workaround is that you can always add a lot more value than you think you need so that the eraser can be used to remove value. So if you didn't get a chance to add enough value, you can start to, again, I'm going to go back and forth here. You can add a lot and then erase from there, which can sometimes be a fun way to do it. Look for places where you can add darker values. Remember, a lot of us sometimes don't push our contrast enough to accentuate the contrast in form. And just keep going, right? You can keep going from there. Continue to closely study the value shifts, adding and erasing where necessary, and lightly and loosely filling in the hair, following the natural direction that the hair falls. Because this is really just a quickish portrait, right? We're going to spend around 45 minutes to an hour on this. It does not need to be completely finished appearing. Rather, you are trying to aim for looking closely at how the features interact with one another, which I know I've repeated a few times, but I just really want to encourage you to pay close attention to that. If you're super into it and you want to keep working on it and spend 4 hours on it, I certainly won't stop you, but my expectation is to see that you have used that blank and that you are paying attention to how your features are interacting with each other. Don't forget to submit your assignment on the assignment page. And your next assignment will be to draw a self-portrait this way. So your first one is to draw observationally someone else, and then your next assignment will be to draw yourself, which is always the funnest thing to do.